Alrighty, mate.
One question I had was, why do you think the married waiter took such a condescending tone towards the old man? And multiple points, at one point he said, you should have killed yourself last week. And at another point he said, what is an hour more to me than to him?
I think that the other waiter that had more sympathy for the man was more empathetic towards the old man, because at the end they show how he walks into a bar and he's just like the old man. So I think the reason that he was more sympathetic than the other man is because he could feel what he was thinking.
And so, are you saying that the younger man, the man who's married, had nothing to back up, like, how he felt towards the old man, or, like, he just didn't know, like, he didn't have a way of relating to the old man?
Well, it says in the text that he did not wish to be unjust, he was only in a hurry. So that's what he uses to justify being unjust to the old man.
But he still says to the old man, you should have killed yourself last week. Does he really have, like, a right for, like, saying this?
And actually, I think that there's no reason for him to have said that anyway. Even if he is in a hurry, there's no reason to say that. So I think that was an excuse on his part, and that's kind of a repeating theme. If you don't understand something, a lot of the time people will dismiss it as a bad thing.
What do you think?
I also think there's this contrast between this old man and this young waiter. And so there's like this man who's lived his whole life and he's very old, and then there's this inexperienced, kind of ignorant young man who just, maybe he doesn't understand like what to appreciate in life.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying, Lena. I come to there's a lot. I think there's a lot of contrast in this piece that has the contrast, like you said, between the old waiter and the young waiter. And then he uses like a lot of images of light and dark, like the well-lighted place, but then the old man, he says, is like in the shadows like of the leaves. There's like that contrast there. What do you guys think the author's trying to show, like by using this contrast between like the men, like, images of light and dark?
Do you mean, like, what is the meaning of this piece? Or do you
I mean, of the piece, or why did he use the contrast between?
What did it signify?
Well, yeah, what does it signify? What does it like help?
I think they stand for the two contrasting things of like nothingness versus like a place to refugee in. Like the cafe has good lighting, it's clean, and you know they both say they want to spend their time there. Like he says, it was only that and light was all it needed, and a certain cleanness and order for the cafe to. It was all nothing, and a man was nothing too. That's how he's explaining this cafe. Versus, like, the darkness could be, like, confusing, consuming, and the nothingness. That contrast. The symbolism.
What do you think the significance of him using, like, a really kind of mean and, like you said, possibly ignorant man versus the more sympathetic man towards the older?
Do you mean using those two to contrast each other?
Yeah, like why do you think he used one really mean guy and then one, like, two opposites?
Well, I think an obvious thing is that the younger man is young and inexperienced versus the old man who's lived his life, and he maybe knows a lot more bad things than the younger man. And as Isaac was saying, there's a lot of different contrasting things here. And I think it's supposed to just like emphasize the different points of view from different people.
So, what do we think the themes are of this piece? Why was this written?
I think one of the themes of this piece is that you kind of have to like imagine yourself in someone else's shoes to really like fully understand the situation. Like the second waiter in the end, it says like after they closed up the bar, he went out and he went to another bar and went and had a drink, and so he kind of like could feel what that old man was feeling. But the younger waiter just went home and went to sleep with his wife in his house.
It definitely showed like an understanding between like, the old waiter who could understand the life aspects of the old man who like the constant asking of the new waiter like
Do you think the reason that he keeps bringing up light has anything to do with the meaning of the piece?
I think.
No, just
Okay.
that's it.
Oh, that's just like for anyone. I don't know if specifically light has something to do with the meaning of the piece, but I think the light and the well-lighted cafe kind of serves as like hope for both like the old man and like the older waiter, who he talks about like a clean, well-lighted cafe was a very different thing. Like he really finds like that very like comforting place. I think he talks about, I don't know, how like the world, like earlier in that paragraph when he talking about all the nada, like nothing, and it seems like, I looked it up and that was almost a religious word prayer, yeah, so but he replaces like God or with nada, and he uses nada like so many times, I think like over 20 times in that paragraph, and I think in his mind, I don't know, he finds like a lot of despair in the world, and like the world's like a very like dark place for him, but like the well-lighted cafe kind of serves as like hope for him, and how, you know, that some sort of like refuge. Yeah.
Well, building off of what Isaac was saying, I was actually about to bring that up too. I think he's kind of disregarding religion, but like I think it's kind of a theme is you have to find your own thing that you want to believe in. Most people will have kind of some religion, but maybe he doesn't believe that, and so he is finding solace in like quiet and light.
Do you mean like the old waiter is finding the...
Yeah, the old waiter and the old man. Like the old man is kind of doing that too.
So like building off what you're saying, like building off what Isaac was saying with the light and the hope, why would the old man, as this is in the first paragraph, why would he be sitting in the shadows of the leaves of the tree and not in the cafe where it's like well lighted, if the light is like hope?
Well, I found like that I thought Hemingway was saying that like life has no meaning and there is no hope and it's just depressing and full of nothingness, and he doesn't really offer like any way to fix this nothingness. It just seems like the routine of hiding in the cafe late at night with the light and the cleanliness subdues the despair, like rather than curing the nothingness. And like I didn't really find Hemingway was saying like, well, this is how to create a meaningful life, which is like a kind of profound idea. What are these two old men and this young, not old men, the older waiter and the old men doing with their lives? What's the meaning?
I was just kind of going along with what you're saying, like what are they doing with their lives and things like that. Well, he says, the older waiter says, I am one of those who likes to stay late at the cafe with all those who do not want to go to bed, with all those who need a light for the night. And so I think the way that saying that the cafe is a refuge and things like that is correct, because because the waiter wants to keep it open through the night. Like he wants to keep he also says that the reason he doesn't close the cafe is because what if somebody needs to come? And so I think that because the waiter has insomnia, which is the inability to sleep, or a really difficult not being able to sleep well, I think that he would prefer to stay in the cafe in his little refuge, if you will, and then the light sort of signifies him not being able to sleep, and the clean, pure light kind of makes it impossible for the younger man who wants to just go home and sleep. That's why he doesn't like staying in the cafes, because there's so much good light and clear light. But the older man wants to stay in the cafe because he can't sleep, and so he would rather stay where something is light.
Does he have insomnia?
Yeah.
Really?
Do you think he actually has insomnia?
Because at the end there's a quote. It says he would lie in bed and finally with daylight he would go to sleep. After all, he said to himself, it is probably only insomnia. Maybe must have it.
Yeah.
What I got from that was that he probably doesn't actually have insomnia. He's comparing it to insomnia
Me
instead
too.
of being like a little bit
dismissing
sarcastic.
it.
Yeah.
as common because he wants to comfort himself.
So what do you guys think he really means by insomnia?
I think he just has like trouble sleeping. I think
That would be
like he's
something.
like trying to like
I
self
think he has.
he's like trying to like self-diagnose himself like what people do before they go to the doctor and stuff. Yeah.
I think it might be more of a bigger metaphor than that.
Yeah,
I think he might maybe like not have any desire to sleep almost. Maybe at least during the night he doesn't. There's something that keeps him up and he doesn't want to sleep. And then when it gets to the morning and something to do with the light that makes him want to sleep.
I definitely agree because he says he would lie in bed and finally with daylight he would go to sleep.
Exactly.
So when it was light out, he could finally go to sleep. So maybe just like the darkness could like serve as like a, I don't know, a symbol of like all like the despair, like nothingness that we've been talking about, and he's trying to find that light, stay in that like well-lit cafe all night, to find hope in this like world of nothingness that he lives.
it seems like he seems very alone. And at night, I think I sometimes feel alone. You're lying in your own bed, and that he says many must have it. So I think he's trying to comfort himself there, but he's really saying that many people in the world must suffer from the sense of nothingness that just is like forever plaguing him, and he wants to like he wants to comfort himself as he also comforts himself by staying in the cafe late at night in the light where you don't feel so alone and the feelings come on.
So do you think that the darkness is comforting him? Like more
Or
comforting
do
than the
you
light?
think, I kind of think it's scary to him, and that he's not necessarily, he may be afraid of it, but he may not be afraid of it, but he doesn't like it, per se.
But did you guys know? Oh, sorry. Can you say?
So to what Ben was saying, like, what is he afraid of? He was like, nor can you stand before Lord with dignity, although that is what is provided for this hour. What did he fear? It was not fear or dread, it was a nothing that he knew too well.
I think that was the insomnia.
I mean, just the nothingness out there is kind of scary. I mean, think about it. Like, the universe is just so big, and there's so much.
And you're so
Like,
small.
nothing is out there, and we're so like minuscule, like compared to. I mean, I've thought about like that in the past, and it's kind of like a scary thought.
So do you guys think that this piece, like, depicts the struggle of dealing with nothingness and the lack of purpose in life?
Definitely.
Do you think that's why they did not put names in the story? When nothingness.
Like,
was
to
just-
show unimportant.
The insignificance of the people.
Do you also think that they might have kept on saying how the old man has plenty of money to show how money's insignificant to life?
And the woman,
Mm-hmm.
he said they had a wife, but she didn't really provide.
Yes.
It doesn't provide much anymore.
It sounds like maybe it's saying like even the people in your life don't make your life significant.
Yeah.
Or it could also be emphasizing that because it says like maybe your wife would make him better. Or like maybe the people in your life could make your life have significance.
Speaking of women, I thought, like, I noticed in this piece, all the women who were mentioned, they seem to just be caring for the needs of men. Like, the niece who cared for the old man, and that's what she did, or the wife that served to comfort the young waiter. And I thought that was sort of, like, a little bit misogynistic, almost.
And the girl with the soldier.
The time period of the story, we know from the Spanish coin currency, the peseta, where that coin is used from 1869 to 2002. So we know that it's like an older time period.
Also, this piece I think was written in the 1930s.
Yeah,
Post
so-
World War.
So I mean that was a time period where
for
women's role was much different than it is presently.
And then it's also in Spain, which has a different culture than what we're accustomed to.
Also, we've talked a lot about the emphasis of light that he puts on, but then also in that long paragraph on the last page, he says, but you do not want music. Certainly you do not want music. And when I read that, I was thinking about like the emphasis of light is something you can see and music is something you would hear. And then they also mentioned earlier how the old man is deaf. Do you think that has some sort of relation?
Right, well, I mean, I definitely think that's part of it, like you were saying, like with the music, and maybe, I think it is ironic that the old man was deaf, and then also the older waiter said like how he didn't want music, and maybe the music can like, I don't know, maybe the music also serves as like negativity, like all of like the sounds and like the clamor of everything, and how that's like negative.
That kind of takes away from the nothingness. So don't you think that'd be kind of counterintuitive? Because he's scared of the nothingness, but the
Yeah.
music takes away from the nothingness, but he doesn't like the
But
music.
just like, I don't know.
Wait, say that again?
Okay, so what we were kind of talking about earlier is how he had a fear of nothingness. And you would think that music would kind of take away from nothingness because it would fill the room. But he's also saying that how you do not want music.
Okay.
Because also in like the first paragraph, even though the deaf guy was deaf, he was deaf and now at night it was quiet and he felt the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Was the old man really deaf though? Because
Yeah.
he had conversations with the waiter.
Well, but he doesn't have conversations with the
But
waiter.
he understands they said,
He knows when to respond.
they said
Ah.
back, he said, no, finish. The waiter wiped the edge of the table with a towel and shook his head, and then the man stood up and slowly counted the saucers and left.
Or he says another.
Right, but he could have, just because the waiter says no finish doesn't necessarily mean that the man understood. The waiter also wipes the edge of the table with a towel. Like, that's a sign of, like, closing up shop and things like that. So the waiter, so the old man doesn't necessarily hear what he says, but he can interpret through body language that the waiter said, we're closing.
But right before that it says no more tonight, close now. And he says another.
But it also says.
Right, but he could also be just sitting there with a glass saying another,
He can
instead of...
speak.
He says
Just 'cause
you
he
should
can
have
speak
killed
doesn't mean he's
yourself
deaf.
last week,
I mean,
and
he can still
he
speak,
doesn't.
he's deaf.
Deaf people speak, but it's really...
It's very rare.
Well, but plenty of people have gone through a life for half of their life or more being able to
Exactly.
hear. And I mean, I'm sure you'd still be able to speak if you went deaf after like 30 or 40
Yeah.
years of being able to hear.
Or like if you're old, when you get old, you go deaf. Like
Mhm.
And
grandparents and stuff go
Yeah.
deaf when they get older.
And
they
also,
don't
like-
talk to you.
Yeah, and like also, like the waiter, when the waiter says you should have killed yourself last week, the deaf man doesn't even show recognition of having hear that. He just says a little more about I want some more drink instead
That
of
is-
not
sorry.
relating to you should have killed yourself.
That is actually something that made me wonder if he actually was deaf though, because if people go through their whole life hearing negative things about themselves or other people, eventually they stop wanting to hear. And I don't know if maybe he's not deaf, maybe he's just not wanting to hear it. And that's like the same thing with the older waiter. He doesn't want to hear things.
In the music.
Yeah.
I would relate that also.
I think maybe the deafness is just symbolism for like not wanting to hear the negativity in the world or something.
So, going off what you're saying is like not wanting to hear the negativity. Do you think that has anything to do with like in the first paragraph when it says the old man liked to sit late because he was deaf? What does those 2 points have to do with like sitting late and being deaf?
Well, I
Is
think
that maybe not?
I think the section that you just read isn't necessarily related to it itself, but if you read the whole thing, the old man liked to sit late because he was deaf, and now at night it was quiet and he felt the difference. He's deaf, but I mean, imagine going through the day, like, not, like, hearing things that you don't want to hear, or not being able to hear anything, and, like, wondering what it means, and then suddenly it's all quiet, and you're sitting there, and you don't have to interpret anything, you just can sit there by yourself.
So you think that relates to like the nothingness?
Yeah, I think the calmness of the cafe and the quiet, like, he's not
The routine
suddenly
of
being
coming?
thrown like things at him that he needs to think about.
But why would it say he was deaf if he wasn't actually deaf?
Yeah. Why would it? Well,
I don't know. Either way, I think there's like it could be both, and they could both mean things, but I don't think it's like extremely significant to the whole meaning of the piece. Like it's a cool thing to ponder. It could be either, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's just like a small part of it. Maybe.
So, I I'm just looking at this piece and I'm thinking like, oh, he's talking about nothing, and Hemingway's basically standing for like, you're nothing, there's no meaning to life or anything. Do you guys agree with this? Like, do you think life is just nothing, as these old men, old waiter think?
Well, I'm just wondering, where are you getting, like what evidence do you have to support that you think that they think life is nothing?
Well, this waiter talks repeatedly about, like, it was a nothing that he knew too well. It was all a nothing, and a man was nothing too. It was only that, and light was all it needed, and a certain cleanness and order, which is like the cafe subduing this despair. And then he's talking about the prayer and inserting nada for God, and like religion is some place where a lot of people find solace and meaning, but he's denouncing it. And then he's just dismissing everything as insomnia, but he's just really kind of depressed and alone and feeling nothing. So I think that's what Hemingway is trying to say.
And he also said that you have youth and confidence in a job. The older waiter said, you have everything. And what do you lack? Everything but work. So he's saying, my life is meaningless except for my work, which is keeping the cafe open in case other people need it.
Do you think that the reason he keeps the cafe open late at night is because he knows that someday he's going to be that person who needs the cafe?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I definitely think he does, but why do you think on the first page they include the detail about the old man being clean? He says, this old man is clean, he drinks without spilling, even now drunk.
Well,
It just seems like kind of a random.
Well, did you notice that was the older waiter talking? And later it talks about how he's thinking that all there is to life is nothingness and cleanliness and light. And so those are things that he emphasized on.
It kind of fits with the title too, like clean, well-lighted person. Place can be clean too, but maybe it's also talking about an old man being clean.
And I think it serves as another connection between the old man and the waiter, as like the old man is clean, like even when he's drunk, he's still drinking pretty clean. He's like not spilling his drink and things like that. And then the waiter thinks to himself it is a light, of course, but it is necessary that the place be clean and pleasant. So I just think it serves as another connection between the two of them.
And I also thought it was interesting, like the older waiter's like, oh yeah, he's clean and everything, and he walks unsteadily but with dignity. But the young waiter's like, an old man is a nasty thing. But the older waiter's like, no, he's clean.
Did you think that? Okay. Well, did you think that the older waiter felt that the young man was talking about who he was becoming? Because there were a lot of parallels between the older waiter and the old man.
And more experience in life. Definitely, this young man is ignorant, and he has a job, and he has the wife and the time.
But do you think that most of the things that the young waiter was saying about the old man could apply to the older waiter also?
I
think a little bit.
so, but did the young waiter really mean it like that?
Well,
Or
I
was
mean,
he
he wasn't
just-
directing it at the older waiter, but if he's saying it about another person and it still applies to him, then it means the same thing.
He says, I am of those who like to stay late at the cafe. So
Yeah,
that's
so he,
basically the old man as well.
Also, we know that from reading this that they use a lot of dialogue. What do you guys think the significance of the dialogue is, or what do you think Hemingway, what do you think the reason for using so much dialogue was?
I think part of it maybe is to show like the contrast between like the young waiter and the old waiter, and throughout the piece a more positive light is reflected on the old waiter. So maybe Hemingway just uses that to like show the difference between like the different views of how people like view the world. And since like a positive light is reflected on the older waiter, maybe that's more of Hemingway's views. Also though, I think the sentences are very short, like the syntax is like how should I know? Or when he's talking about, he's drunk now, he said, he's drunk every night. Why didn't he kill himself, or what did he want to kill himself for? How should I know? How did he do it? He hung himself with a rope. Who cut him down? His niece. Like that, like short syntax also kind of maybe shows like that time of the night how it's like really late and how like their minds really aren't like, deep in conversation, which I don't know what that could used to be shown.
I also think that the dialogue also, because I'm pretty sure this is magical realism, because it's got some believable settings, but I believe that the dialogue makes it more believable, and also that like it creates a certain tone that makes the reader feel like it creates a certain tone for dialogue instead of if like you didn't use dialogue it would have a different.
What tone do you think is created?
Well, the tone, it depends on what part of the dialogue you're in. Like, mostly it's the young man complaining, I think, so it's like a complaining tone. But then when it's the old man talking, it's more of a contemplative tone, I think.
I thought it was more objective because the author never really gives an opinion about anything. Like, he really blatantly states, like, the man says, "You should have killed yourself last week," he said to the deaf man. You know, he said. That's not taking any side. And then it's a lot of dialogue. And I was wondering how you thought it painted the old waiter in a positive light, because I just thought it was sort of put how it was, and the dialogue was sort of being that objective.
I think by saying something like, "You should have killed yourself last week," or "I wouldn't want to be that old," an old man is a very nasty thing. I think we can all agree that that's very like negative. And compared, like contrasted with the older waiter, the younger waiter seems very negative, and the older, he does seem more positive. How he talks about how the older man drinks with dignity and he's very clean even still, like throughout the piece. So I think maybe even though the author doesn't take a side, by having the two characters talk and by having the younger waiter talk in a more negative light, it kind of puts the older waiter in a more positive light.
I think the diction he uses, it really, like, when he's saying, "I wouldn't want to be that old," an old man is a very nasty thing. It's very, like, the tone is very harsh and direct, and then it shifts directly from not always, this old man is clean, he drinks without spilling. And so there's, like, a tone shift to being more sympathetic. So I think that's kind of the diction he uses throughout the piece, is going, like, a sharp contrast in tone shift.
Yeah.
It's the tone is how the author feels, and like this man is going to say that no matter what. That's just what he's saying, but is that how the author is also feeling?
I think that the tone throughout the piece of the author is very opinionative, because he creates this dialogue with the waiter where the younger waiter is very opinionative as to what old men are like, and that I really should not be up at this hour. I should be asleep at this hour. And then the author also creates this dialogue, or this monologue almost, with the younger waiter, or with the older waiter, pardon me, talking about like nothingness, and how life is nothingness, how his life is nothingness. And so I think the author is very opinionative in saying that, as we were talking about before, that life is nothingness, and that there's much despair in nothingness.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I forgot what I was gonna say. Go ahead.
I think the dialogue and the tone and the diction that the author uses really adds imagery to the piece. Because I know when you said, when the old way was saying, "This old man is clean, he drinks without spilling," like it added like an image in my mind, like, oh, this old man actually isn't a hobo, like might actually have like a purpose to life.
And another part, good diction from the author, when the young waiter is talking to the old man, he says, "Finished," he said, speaking with the omission of syntax stupid people employ when talking to drunken people or foreigners. It really kind of makes you like imagine this guy like really talking down to someone.
Yeah. Definitely see the author calling him stupid.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, back to what Elena was saying, how it's you were saying how it's the author, Tony's the author's opinion, not the characters. I definitely think that's true, but I think the author can use characters and use the character's tone to show his own tone.
Well, what about like when they're talking about suicide as if it's like a side conversation? They're not even like discussing the magnitude of like how serious suicide is, and that's like his diction. And I think that the imagery, as you point out again, is very like describing, and then he also uses a third person point of view, which I think all make him seem the tone seem like he's kind of apathetic. He's objective in stating it how it is.
Yeah, I did feel like it at first glance it seems very objective. Like the language is very like non-opinionated from the author's point of view, but I definitely think that he cast the older waiter in a more positive, intelligent light than the younger waiter. But what do you guys think of that, considering the fact that the younger waiter seems so much happier than the older waiter? Like, what significance to the story do you think that has?
I think showing like the nothingness again of how the young waiter has, because when it says the old waiter has everything but work, he lacks everything but work. It shows the nothingness that the old man and the young waiter says that.
That he has confidence.
Yeah, he has confidence.
Confidence. Use confidence in a job.
Yeah, it shows the happiness, and then how the old waiter has like nothing.
So, do you think that lacking a sense of confidence or even like people in your life would equate to like understanding the sense of nothingness as the older waiter does, or do you think that that's just his personality or that's just who he is?
I think definitely having a lack of confidence makes you seem like a lack of confidence. You really, it's more more than nothingness.
Where do you find the balance between like there's kind of this negative younger waiter who's like being rude to this old man and talking about suicide, like telling him to kill himself, but he's happy, and then there's these older men and they're really unhappy and they have nothing in their life. So where's the balance between like knowing about, thinking about things deeply and feeling that versus being like happy and sort of ignorant?
I don't really know where the balance is, but the younger waiter isn't totally happy. I mean, throughout the whole piece, he's very like frustrated with his job, and he talks about the older waiter says it's not 2:30, but and then the younger waiter says I want to go home to bed. And what's the hour? More to me than to him. He's very impatient. So maybe even though he thinks he has a good life home, he says he has confidence. I don't know, he's not like happy all the time. Like he's like frustrated and impatient with his job.
Well, like who wouldn't be impatient when you have like a wife or like a partner at home waiting for you in bed? That's what it says.
Does this piece like say that as you get older, the more not necessarily like if you feel like if you lose your confidence and you feel like lose all of your like your wife or you become more knowledgeable, does that mean your life gains, even though you know all these things and you're older and you've lived your life, does that mean your life has nothingness?
Or just despair?
Yeah.
Do you despair in what you know?
I think it's saying that as the wiser you get, the more your eyes are opened to the real nothingness of life, which is a really negative theme. But I mean, do you guys think that's actually something that's applicable to our lives? Do you think that the more we learn, the more we'll understand how insignificant we are?
Yeah, I think that I've thought about that a lot and like
wow, I'm so small. Like, what am I doing? And then I was like thinking, oh, people are so terrible. Oh my God, I can't believe this. And then I'm nothing. I'm so small. But I think that I've come past the stage of like, wow, this life is nothing, to create something for yourself and make it into something and take that action versus like sitting in a cafe all night to smother your feelings of depression. So although Hemingway is presenting this, I think we need to take as people the lesson that you can change your life and you can make something of it that you enjoy.
Do you think that might have been what Hemingway was trying to say? Like setting such a negative theme that you know that maybe that's not actually what he means?
Do you think I was just thinking that, do you think he's like using the older writer maybe as like an example of how one can just go through their life and not do anything,
Be
thoughts
passive.
and be nothing, just maybe inspire the readers to take action. I don't know.
That's a really interesting thought. But I know Hemingway committed suicide, and and he also was like really, I'm pretty, like, around this time period there was like existentialism and like nihilism, which is like you're nothing and like we just exist and we're not that big, and so I think Hemingway believes in this, but I think maybe it does inspire us to create meaning.
I think as with any literary piece, you can take it however you want. You can take away whatever message is the message that you brought from it. But yeah, I think you might be right. Maybe you really did mean it negatively.
Yeah, maybe like the choice. Maybe what he's saying is like the choice is yours. You can choose to like go through life passively like a jellyfish, or you can choose, or you can choose to make a difference in the world and bring meaning into your life.
Do you know if this was written towards like close to when he committed suicide or a lot before?
I don't know.
Because he does talk about suicide.
And it's interesting
How ironic.
And it's interesting because the next two stories at the beginning of the piece, it says the first of the three stories by the author of Death in the Afternoon and A Farewell to Arms.
Depressing.
Farewell to Arms is one of his.
You know if it was earlier.
I
No, this is the first one because this is the first of 3 stories.
Yeah, so it's probably not that. It's probably not like, I'm going to write about suicide.
Yes.
It
That's
was
what I'm going to do.
published in 1926.
Do you guys think the setting has
I don't know
anything to do with it? Because I know A Farewell to Arms is about the Spanish Civil War.
You mean the setting like in a
Like-
cafe or like
Like
the
the
setting?
Spanish in Spain.
The Spanish, could we see that Spanish influence?
Yeah, you see the Spanish influence and like the Spanish money.
What was
And the soldier.
Well, did Ernest come from Spain?
No, I'm wondering why he wrote about Spain if he's from America. Although he was in World War I, I think, and so I guess there's a lot of world affairs, maybe.
But this was in 1926.
And he killed himself in 1961. So
But
So there should
he might have had a life
maybe
filled
it was
with depression.
Maybe.
Was it World War I like in 1940?
1914 to 1918 was World War I.
Nice.
That's okay though.
And there's a lot.
But maybe he is trying to talk about the nothingness with the Spanish Civil War and show maybe the view of the people that were involved in that instead of his own opinions.
Is this, when was the Spanish Civil War? Do we know?
It was, I think,
Or maybe
Well, what about
because he was in World War I and like he saw all of this killing and stuff, and like it was awful because it was like a world war. Maybe saying that that's like not significant because none of us are significant, so it was kind of pointless.
There was an economical crisis in the 1920s.
In Spain?
Yeah, that led the country to civil war, or like the beginnings of civil war.
yeah.
So I mean, that it could be related to that.
Because the Civil War was, right before World War II, So.
There's also they call like the lost generation is the writers and artists living in Paris after World War I, and because of like all the violence from these huge wars, there's
It says unprecedented and invalidated previous ideas about faith, life, and death, and that there was like God, love, and manhood before, but then it like dissolved because of this huge war, and they were like struggling with moral and psychological aimlessness. So he was in an error, kind of.
So how does this relate back to a thing will let it place?
The
Like how does
whole,
this whole, like how does the time period that he's writing in relate to the different themes and images that he puts into this piece?
well, as Elena was saying, we were seeing an emergence of existentialism, and because of these wars, and I mean, if you were in a war, wouldn't you be scarred? That's what PTSD is, and it could be that this, I mean, you know, like shock and stuff.
So do you think that he's writing this, he wrote this after World War I, right?
Yeah.
So is this maybe a reflection on what war was like? I mean, he mentions a soldier in the street, a soldier walking in the street with a girl, and then he also talks about this nothingness that could be a result of PTSD. So could this be a reflection on what the war was like?
Well, I think just experiencing stuff like that would make you probably feel a little bit more negative about life even. It could not, maybe it's not directly about a war, it could be the result of a war though.
Which is the rise of this movement,
Yeah.
which is like life has no purpose.
And nothing.
Maybe going back to like what I was saying like way back in the beginning with like how light is oh, maybe he's like using the light and the dark to show like
As a contrast.
yeah, like the word puts you in the dark and the light's way over there.
And war is very noisy.
Yeah, so maybe that's why he doesn't like music.
And
He prefers silence, yeah.
and silence could be peace.
Do you think the old waiter was a waiter all his life, or do you think he was something before he became a waiter?
Yeah, I was, okay, go ahead, Rob.
He does say at one point that he never had confidence. When they're talking about confidence, the old waiter says, "No, I have never had confidence." And so, that leads me to believe that he doesn't really feel like his life has been like fulfilled.
But going back to what Kate says, I do think it's very interesting that it doesn't say anything about these people's past.
It
Or their
refers to them
names.
very like third person.
Impersonal.
They never say their names. They're just like the old waiter, the young.
I think that goes back to the whole thing where there's the theme of how each single person is sort of insignificant without giving any pretty much detail about them. Like they may be the main characters, but they're still pretty insignificant.
That shows like nothingness.
And also how people in war and individuals very insignificant, or in most cases.
But it also says, it doesn't actually say how old the older waiter is. Maybe he's like a couple years older than the young waiter. Maybe he's just had more traumatic experiences in his life because it just says the older waiter and the younger waiter. It doesn't exactly say how much of an age difference there is either.
Yeah.
He does say he lacks youth. So that makes me think that he's probably not just a couple years older. He's probably a little bit more older
And
than
then how like contemplating and how deep he is with like his conversation with himself. Like I would never have that deep of a conversation with myself.
Did you guys notice that as soon as the younger waiter left and he was by himself, suddenly all of his thoughts were coming out and like he was suddenly thinking. And I thought that
I think time lapses.
I thought that could be a reflection on like what you were saying earlier about loneliness. Like when you're alone, suddenly you start thinking all these things and like your thoughts can spiral out of control and you can start thinking about what is the meaning of life. But
Well, I have a question. So we've seen this, like, we know existentialism was prevalent in this time period. We look at this piece. Do you guys still think this is, like, applicable to today? What is the view now on this topic?
I got a question for that question. What
Existentialism?
Oh. It's like the belief, like, life has no purpose, the universe is indifferent to human beings, and, like, nothingness. I think.
nothingness.
Yeah.
Can you repeat your question? question.
Like, is it relatable to today?
Yeah, what do you think, like, the common perception of the meaning of life is now? Is it, like, depressing, like this view? Or,
Go ahead, Esther.
I think it's kind of different because I know something we commonly hear is one small person can change the world. And you don't hear them talking about that in this piece, and I think that is becoming more common now to believe that organizations all over the world, like one penny can change the world, one pencil can change the world, one person can change the world. So I think our views have changed from the existentialism to more individualism.
But I also think it depends on who you are and where you're from.
Yeah.
Because I
Depending
know,
on what
Just
part of the world you live in and what their beliefs are and like how you're viewed in society, or like, and also depending, like, you can live in like the United States and still not feel that way.
yeah, and I don't think there's a general common consensus on what the meaning of life is, because as Kayla was saying, like, people from different areas will believe different things, and even people from within those areas will believe different things, because we're all individual, different people. And, I mean, I know that even, like, between West Coast and East Coast, there's a lot of different things. Like, I know you guys call cookies
and
donuts.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really have much to do with the meaning of life, but it definitely illustrates that there's discrepancies between different areas and what people, like, grow up thinking.
Yeah, and I agree. I do think there are a lot of differences, like you were saying. But as society progresses today, there is like a really stress of individualism. I know,
yeah,
compared to like the
opportunity, creating something
creating
for
something for
yourself,
yourself,
which is
and-
like not just being fast.
right. And even if maybe during like we can't take exactly what Hemingway intended, if he's trying to say maybe that life is nothing because of he wrote it during this existentialism time in literature, maybe we can look at that and think about why he wrote it in those views and take from that maybe we can do something with our lives, like what we were talking about earlier. Even if we're not taking his intended meaning, we can still interpret it.